Welcome to Politics News Wolf US channel. The impact of the critical war between Kiev and Moscow is not limited to Ukraine in the harsh steppes of Eastern Europe. These days, the effects of the war brought Russia to the brink of socio-economic collapse. In other words, we are now seeing the former Soviet era, Russia in the most critical times of the war. With the local people in Russia coming to the point of exhaustion, the political isolation of the leader of Vladimir Putin increased with the support provided to the Ukrainian army by the actors that determine the military and political balances in the USA and Western Europe. Kiev is trying to turn this situation of Russia and Putin in its favor for this. The Ukrainian army knows very well what it has to do and what it primarily aims at. We have witnessed that the Ukrainians have carried out critical attacks on Russian soil by using unmanned aerial vehicles since the beginning of the war. In order to achieve this goal, these areas were generally cities close to Ukraine's borderlines, such as Belgorod, Garaj, Kyiv, and Bsk. But was it possible for the Ukrainian army to maximize its offensive potential and hit Russia and its leader Vladimir Putin right at the heart? Let's discover together the surprising answers to the riddle that dragged the Russian people and Vladimir Putin into a dead end. You may remember that especially in recent months, anti-aircraft systems have been detected on the roofs of important buildings in Moscow, including the Ministry of Defense. These systems were placed there for a very critical reason because the Kremlin was concerned that Ukraine or those sympathetic to Ukraine might try to launch airstrikes on high-value targets. These factors of concern showed that not only Putin, but also the Russian people, that their country is no longer a safe place. For these reasons, Russian citizens did not want to fight on the Ukrainian front lines, nor did they want to live an uneasy life in Russia. In this environment of unrest, the Russian people witnessed 3 consecutive drone attacks in the capital Moscow, in fear and panic. These attacks in Moscow were the most important factor that ignited a huge turmoil in the Russian people after the drone attacks in the Russian capital. Russian cities are thought to be under aerial bombardment on the streets of St. Petersburg or Moscow. There is the possibility of a threat to life. So what is happening in Russia in the face of these attacks? Let's take a look at those who reacted violently to these events. While much of the ongoing war is fought in neighboring Ukraine, a shadowy but increasingly active front has erupted within President Vladimir Putin's own territory. Several groups, allegedly Russians, who oppose the Kremlin and its handling of the conflict have taken up arms claiming to carry out notable operations from acts of sabotage to infrastructure to the killing of high-profile figures. While relatively little is known about these insurgent groups, complicit in activities deemed terrorism by Moscow experts who have done extensive research on the groups and their representatives, have provided new insights into the insurgent organization's aims and tactics. The main purpose of these rebel groups in Russia is to put an end to striking situations such as the latest drone attacks in Moscow and to discourage Putin from this war. In order to achieve this goal, these rebel groups in Russia can resort to armed actions, but whether it's the Russian people or the Kremlin leaders who have brought the situation in the country to such a severe level, is a matter of debate as it is seen. The Russian people could not guess what to do against the injustices and the oppressive administration. They suffered and sometimes they responded more harshly. But of course, this danger posed by the Russian people and rebel groups against the Putin regime has serious consequences. Thousands of anti-war protesters were arrested across Russia in the immediate aftermath of the 2022 invasion. Such acts of force compliance and silencing were common throughout the Soviet Union era, but these are high-profile cases, anomalies in the grand scheme of things. How exactly do normal, ordinary Russians think and feel about this? Everyone in Russia knows that you are under pressure. Maybe some people don't know and can live without this knowledge. Maybe some people who know they're being suppressed do their own brain training, convincing themselves that they're doing the right thing. The parties who are aware of the repression regime in Russia either flee the country and start a new life or have to live the Soviet era, Russia in 2023. On the other hand, it is good to be apolitical in Russia because it's less stressful for Russians, Russian citizens who think otherwise can go to jail. Since the Soviet Union, this has always been the case in Russia. If you get too involved in politics, Vladimir Putin is also implementing such a strategy in Russia, taking into account the risks of this repression regime. So how can the president of a country that is under so much pressure not be able to prevent the drone attacks in Moscow, one after the other? As we mentioned, the attacks in Moscow seem to lead to the disgrace of the Russian leader, and the chaos in the country to gain a whole new dimension. But among all this, the most effective result of the attacks in Moscow was the realization of the Russian people, how serious the danger of war was. Because after the attacks in Moscow, the city's airspace was completely closed to flights, and traffic was stopped abruptly. In addition, strict security measures were taken in the city, including extensive checks and long convoys of vehicles. These security measures indicated that Russia was plunged into complete chaos. In addition, these attacks brought the Russian people to the point of exhaustion and proved that there was no longer a certain order in Russia. A striking statement from the Russian presidential administration claimed that Ukraine used 2 drones to attack the Kremlin in the heart of Moscow overnight. Apparently, Russian forces used radar equipment to disable drones because while there was no loss of life in the incident, President Putin escaped unscathed from these assassination attempts. However, the Kremlin described all these attacks as an assassination attempt against Vladimir Putin. Ukraine refused to have carried out the attack and claimed it was orchestrated by Russia. Then several striking videos about the assassination attempts emerged in the images shared on social media, at least one drone flying towards the Kremlin, and then a huge explosion was recorded. Another video seemed to show a fire and smoke rising from the Kremlin's dome. After these stunning assassination attempts, the airspace in Moscow was completely closed to flights, and traffic was abruptly stopped. In addition, strict security measures were taken in the city, including extensive checks and long convoys of vehicles. These security measures indicated that Russia was plunged into complete chaos. In addition, the assassinations against Putin brought the Russian people to the point of exhaustion and proved that there was no longer a certain order in Russia. On the other hand, there were many speculations about assassination attempts against the Russian leader. But if what the Kremlin says is true and this is a genuine attempt on the president's life, then it would be a very embarrassing event for the Kremlin. Questions will now be asked about how well Vladimir Putin is protected in Russia and about the effectiveness of Russian air defense. In fact, by all accounts, Mr. Putin appears to be one of the most heavily guarded leaders in the world, but both Putin and Russia have been failing this test in recent days when it comes to drone attacks. The drone attacks in Moscow were the latest example of this situation. In summary, it's not yet clear whether this issue will lead to a significant escalation on the battlefield, but it is a known fact that if this war continues, it is likely that much worse situations will await Russia than the drone attacks on the Kremlin because the Ukrainian armed forces with the military power it received from the USA and Western Europe seems to make the Russians regret that they started this invasion. In other words, the drone attacks by the Ukrainians on the most important strategic center, such as the Kremlin, can be considered a start in the coming days. Maybe the Ukrainians will make the Russians experience the beginning of the end much better with the fire that they have lit in the Kremlin. We will see together whether these possibilities will come true. Thank you for watching the video. We value your opinion. Please comment, share them with us, and thank you so much once again for watching this video. See you in my next video.